Okay, so a pretty important class today. Difference between make and do, basically. A lot of mistakes are made by non-native speakers when they confuse these two. So I'll give what I would consider a pretty complete and thorough explanation. I'll show you what the meanings of each of these words are, in what situations we use them, what nouns we use them with particularly. Then I'll show you what some of the exceptions are, and then we'll do a little practice exercise together. So make and do. So yeah, a lot of non-native speakers do make a lot of mistakes with these. They confuse them, and I think part of the confusion comes from the way that we teach, or the way that make and do are typically taught when you're first learning English in school, typically. So a lot of the mistakes come from the associations that you have. So make. Let's look at make first, and we'll see if it makes sense. So I just want to ask you, what is your understanding of make? If I had to ask you to give a definition of make, what would it be? Now, often when I ask this question to my students, they often go like this with their hands. So I say, what's the meaning of make? And they'll say, make a cake, for example, something like that. And this is where a lot of the confusion comes from. People think that make has this idea of fabricate, build, construct. It's not. It's not that. And the reason is that when you think of those three verbs, fabricate, build, and construct, what do they have in common? Well, they all have in common that they're for physical things. Now, really, make, there's no relationship between make and the physical world. You can use make for physical things, of course, like make a cake. That's a physical thing. But you make a mistake. And this is a very common mistake. People often say, do a mistake. You don't do a mistake. You make a mistake. Now, when you make a mistake, you're not fabricating, building, or constructing a mistake. So the words, these verbs that often teachers will give you as an association or as alternative synonyms for make, they don't help English learners learn the difference or learn what the true meaning of make is. Make has no fixed relationship with the physical world. It can be used for physical things and non-physical things. And I think it's a big mistake to teach non-native speakers that make is the idea of fabricate, build, construct, because it's not, because these three words are only for physical things, and make has no relationship purely with the physical world. So I like to use different alternative verbs to explain the meaning of make. And these three words I think are pretty simple and they make sense, which are, we put them here on the whiteboard. Make is basically create, produce, and generate. Create, produce, and generate. Now, the great thing about these synonyms is that they can be used for physical things and they can be used for non-physical things as well. So these three verbs are the best way to understand, let's say, the concept of make. Good. All right. So when you make a mistake, for example, where you produce a mistake, yeah, you make money. You don't do money, you make money. And that's the idea of generating money. You make a cake. That's the idea of create. That's a creation. So all things that are creations are typically make. Produce, generate, create. They're the best verbs to use so that you can understand the concept of make. It's not necessarily physical things. Often, in fact, maybe most of the time, make is used for non-physical things. So remove those synonyms from your brain. Fabricate, build, construct, forget it. They don't help you understand make. Create, produce, generate. These are the three best synonyms to help you understand this. So there's also another thing which is related to make, which is the concept of speech and thought. So all things, now when I say things, I mean objects, related to the production of thought and speech are typically with make, not do. All right. So you make a comment, for example, you make a comment, or you make a complaint, you make a statement. All the things are related to speech. And it's interesting that thought and speech kind of have this creative quality. So these are not exceptions. They are really related to the concept of creating or creation, because thought and speech are typically associated with creation. They have this creative quality. So you'd also, so just as I said, you make a comment, you make a complaint, you make a suggestion. All of these are related to speech. You can also make an impression on somebody. Okay, you make an impression on somebody, and that's the thoughts that they have of you. So again, it has this creative quality. You what else can you make? You make a prediction. You make a prediction, and again, that's using thought and speech. So make is related to these concepts: create, produce, generate, and then all objects that are related to the production of thought and speech, because both thought and speech have this creative quality. Good. Are we clear? So far, so good. Excellent. Right then, let's get on to do. So what is the idea of do? Again, the idea of do, it's, let's say, the generic verb of action, the generic verb of action. This is why do is also an auxiliary verb. So if you ask me, Adam, do you live in Madrid? I say, yes, I do. Do represents, let's say, it represents all verbs. It's the generic verb of action. So I think that the reason that the auxiliary verb for actions is do is because it's the generic verb of actions. So there we go. So do is basically you complete an activity. Now, let me give you an example. And what do you think it is with homework? Do you think it's make homework or do homework? So you've got make homework and you've got do homework. A lot of students often make the mistake where they say, for example, this evening I will make my homework. It's incorrect. Okay, you do homework. Okay, because homework is an activity and you need to complete the activity. But make homework can be used. In what situations do you think it can be used? Well, you can make homework, for example, if you're the teacher. If you're a teacher, well, you produce, you create the homework, then you give it to your students, and then the students complete the homework. So think of do as this, it's completing an activity. Another few words that you can use to associate with do are the following. So you do all things related to tasks, jobs, and activities, right? Tasks, jobs, and activities. So you do the cleaning in your house. Yeah, you do chores. You do the cleaning, you do the washing up, you do the washing. All of these things are tasks. They're tasks that you have in the house, which are called chores. So all chores are typically with the verb do. Jobs, well, you do your job. You have a job and you do it. You go to work and you do your job. You complete the activity, which is your job. And then activities like you do yoga. You do yoga. Sometimes non-native speakers will make the mistake and they will say, yes, I make yoga in the evenings. Now, you can't make yoga. You're not creating yoga. You're doing yoga. Yoga already exists. And sometimes when I explain this, a student will sometimes say, yes, but Adam, when I do yoga, I make postures. So I make yoga. So no, you do exactly that. You make a posture. Yeah, you make a posture. You put your body into a strange position, but you do yoga. You're not creating yoga. Yoga already exists. Yeah. So yoga is an activity. You do yoga. And in order to do yoga, you make postures. That's basically what yoga is. So you're producing these postures. You're creating these postures, but you're doing yoga. I hope that makes sense. All right. So excellent. Let's have a look at a few exceptions. So there are some exceptions. And sometimes when I explain these, when I say, oh, there are exceptions, that's when my students will get frustrated and say, oh, there are exceptions. Make and do is crazy. So no, there are always exceptions with everything. So the general rule is apply the rule and memorize the exceptions. There are exceptions with everything, but the best thing is if you can understand the difference between make and do with this explanation, all you need to do is memorize the exceptions. Now, what is an exception? Well, an exception, it could be considered an exception if it doesn't fit with one of these rules, or An exception is what you consider an exception. So, for example, what do you think it is with phone call? To what a phone call? What do you think it is? Make or do? Well, I can tell you that this one, it's you make a phone call. Now, some people think this is strange and it doesn't make sense, but to others, it makes perfect sense. So if this doesn't make sense to you, well, you could classify that as an exception and then you write it down and you practice it. So practice. So first of all, you decide which ones you consider to be exceptions. The ones that don't fit with this rule that you have in your head, which I've just explained, consider that to be an exception and then practice it. That's fine. But to others, make a phone call sounds completely normal and they don't consider this an exception. So don't worry about it. Yeah. Remember, you only need to learn the exceptions, and the exceptions are, by definition, exceptions. There aren't many of them. So if you can understand and recreate this rule, all you need to do is identify, learn, and practice the exceptions. That's simple. Good. So let's have a look at some of these exceptions. So yeah, we make the bed. You don't do the bed, we make the bed. Now, I consider this an exception. Why? Because for me, it doesn't really fit in these rules. So you think, well, making the bed, that's a chore. That's a task that you have to do in your house. And you're not creating the bed. The bed already exists. Yes, I know, but we say make the bed. We don't say do the bed. Now, I think there is some logic to this. I imagine that it would be make the bed because it's probably from make the bed tidy or make the bed pretty or make the bed nice, something like that, because often we use make followed by an adjective. All right. I would imagine it's something related to that. But yes, making the bed is a chore, so it should be do, but it's not do. If you say do the bed, it will be totally incorrect. I consider this to be an exception. So if it's an exception for you also, write it down and practice it. Do damage. You can do damage. Now, you don't make damage. Now, if you think about this, well, you produce damage. If there's an accident and it does some damage to your house or something, or I don't know, there's some lightning and it does damage to the roof of your house. What do you think it is producing this damage? Yeah, I know, but do in this case has an idea of cause. It causes damage, and cause is more related to do. So you can interpret this in two different ways, but it is only do. Now you don't need to worry too much about this one because typically we say cause damage, or we simply use the verb damage. So there was a lightning bolt, lightning hit my house and it damaged my roof. So you don't actually need to use do if you don't want to. You could say the lightning damaged my roof, or the lightning caused some damage to my roof, or you could also say the lightning did some damage to my roof. So it's not essential for you to use this. If you don't like it, you don't need to use this. You could just use the verb damage or cause damage, but it's important to show you this. Okay, so something does you good. So eating salads does you good. Now, I consider this an exception because if something does you good, you could say it produces good things in you. Yeah, but you could also say that it's related to cause. So it causes good effects. That's why it's do. So things that are beneficial for you, they do you good. And the opposite, things that are harmful for you, they do you harm. So I don't know, if you smoke cigarettes every day, it will do you harm, or it will do your lungs harm. All right. So again, I think it's related more to causing, not producing an effect. All right. So make or do dinner. Now you can actually use both of these verbs with dinner or breakfast or lunch, for example. So it's true that, when, English teachers are typically teaching non-native speakers, we will typically say it's make dinner, not do dinner. But lots of native speakers do say do dinner. Now, the reason is that dinner can be interpreted in two ways. So you've got, when it's make dinner, you're talking about the meal that you produce. It's a creation, you mix ingredients, you cook it, and you create a meal, which is, of course, associated with make, because it's creation, producing. But dinner can also be interpreted as an activity, a task that needs to be completed, a chore, if you will. So you can do dinner. So imagine, I don't know, me and my wife are sharing tasks that we have to do in the house for tomorrow. And I don't want to make dinner. I'd prefer to make dinner. And imagine my wife says, for example, well, look, I'll do lunch and you do dinner. That would be very common. So I'll do the task which is producing dinner and you do the task which is producing lunch. All right, so you can make dinner or do dinner. If you're perceiving dinner as a meal that you create or an activity which needs to be completed, a task which needs to be completed. All right, good. So let's have a quick recap. Make, create, produce, generate, and then all things related to the production of thought and speech, because thought and speech have this creative quality. Do is for activities, the generic verb of activities. It's about completing an activity. And then all things related to tasks, jobs, and activities. And then here are some examples that I would consider exceptions. As I said before, you decide what the exceptions are, not me. If these make perfect sense to you, then they're not exceptions for you. But if these do sound a little bit strange for you, then they are exceptions. And exceptions, you just need to write down, learn, and practice. That's it. There aren't many exceptions. That's why they're called exceptions. Excellent. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a practice exercise. So I'll give you a few sentences, and I want you to think about, I want you to consider if you think these sentences would be with do or with make. So let's have a look. Whoop, that's a bit big. Let me change the size of this. Make it a bit smaller. There we go. Perfect. That's much better. Good. So if you want, pause this video, read these sentences and decide, is it do or make in each of these sentences? And also consider the form. So what form would the verb take in each of these sentences? So if you want, pause the video now, and then we'll check in a moment. Okay, so hopefully you've completed this and you've completed it perfectly. So let's have a look. The first one, you should eat more fruit and vegetables. It would make or do. Which one do you think? It would do you good. So we saw this before. I put this one in the exception because it's beneficial for you. Something does you good, it is beneficial for you. Next one. Traditionally, 3 people speeches at weddings in the UK. This one should be pretty simple. A speech is obviously related to speech because it's speech, you know, and you make a speech. So again, it's related to production of words, production of language. So it's make speeches. Good. And in a wedding, just a little bit of a vocabulary here. You've got the groom, which is the man who's going to get married, and then the bride. Okay. Now, when we talk about both of these people, we always say the bride first. So it's the bride and groom. The bride and groom are the 2 people that get married. And then the best man, this is a British tradition originally, but it's also in America and other English-speaking countries. The best man is, let's say, the representative of the groom. So again, the groom is the man who's going to get married, and the groom typically arrives with the best man, who is the representative. Could be your brother, could be your best friend, something like that. Okay, Lucy, all the ironing, washed the floor, and made dinner. All right, so we've got made dinner at the end. So what are all these things? These are chores. These are tasks that you have to do in your house. So it's with the verb do, but because it's in the past, we've got did. John decided that he needed to more research before he could write his essay. So what do you think, make or do? Well, I'll tell you what it is, and maybe you will consider this an exception, but I'll explain why it's not an exception. It's do. You do research. Okay, you do research. Now, some people consider this an exception because they say, yeah, but when I do research, I'm producing documents. Not necessarily. The research is the study, the investigative part of what you produce after. So first you do research, and then maybe you write a report, or you write an essay, or you write your PhD thesis, something like this. But research is purely only absorbing. You're not actually creating anything yet. What you create as a result of research, well, that's separate, and that has a creative quality to it, but not research itself. Research is typically only studying, reading, watching speeches, listening to documentaries, whatever it is. It's more absorbing information, and then from that, well, maybe you'll produce something after, or maybe not. You do research. Can I an exception? Well, I said this before. What is an exception? What is a suggestion? Is something that you say. So it can only be make. Can I make a suggestion? Right, next one. I'm too busy to see you now. Please call my secretary and an appointment. What do you think? Make an appointment, do an appointment? Well, you probably know this. It's make an appointment. This is a classic. Yeah. When you call the doctor, for example, the secretary answers, the standard sentence that you say is, I'd like to make an appointment. Just like you like to make a reservation when you call a restaurant. So you make an appointment, you make a reservation. All right, because you're creating this thing. Okay, didn't exist before, now it exists. So it has this creative quality. You make an appointment, you make a reservation in restaurant or hotel. Next one. I spent a long time in my hair. Well, first of all, we need a gerund in this because you spend time. Gerund. Making or doing? Well, it's doing. I spent a long time doing my hair. Some people consider this an exception. I don't, and I'll explain why, because I think I'm in a good position to talk about hair or lack of hair. So you do your hair. People say, yeah, but when I do my hair, I create a nice hairdo. Well, yeah, but you're not creating hair, okay? You can't create hair. That's why I'm bald. So you do your hair, okay? It's just a task. You complete it, all right? It doesn't have a creative quality. Okay, so the next one. He an attempt to tidy up before she arrived, but the room was still a mess. So you make an attempt, okay? Just like you make an effort, you make an attempt, and it has this producing quality, okay? You're producing an attempt, just like you make effort, you're producing an effort, okay? So again, this is why you need to remember the three verbs: create, produce, and generate, okay? Sometimes people will get a little bit stuck or obsessed with only the creative quality of make, but producing is very much associated with make and very commonly used association. So yeah, it's make an attempt, just like you make an effort. You need to remember that. A lot of people make mistakes with make an effort. They say do an effort. No, you make an effort. You make an effort. Okay, next one. How do you like our new kitchen? I think the workmen a good job. I think the workmen what? Did or make? What do you think it is? Well, it's did a good job. Now, maybe, again, you would consider this an exception, but it's not. I'll explain why. So sometimes when people get this incorrect and they put make, they say, yeah, but they made a kitchen. Yeah, but job and kitchen are two very different things. We're talking about the job, the work that they did, and that can only be with do. So we're not talking about what they created. We're talking about the effort and the work involved. Yeah, not the noun that they produced. Yes, it's true that they made a kitchen. That's true, but they did a good job. So we're talking about the work that they did. Did a good job. Okay, they have too many errors in this article. We can't publish it. Well, just like mistake, an error is a kind of mistake. So they have made too many errors. Just like you make a mistake, you make an error. All right. Good. All right, so what should you do with this information? Well, again, write down any that you got incorrect. Write down any that you would consider an exception from this exercise or from the previous one. Write them down, learn them, practice them. And then from here, really what you can do is, this is only 10 sentences that I gave you, but you go on the internet and there are thousands of practice exercises that you can do to practice the difference between make and do. All you need to do, go to Google and write make, do, practice exercises, or make, do exercises. And then you do those exercises, you do the exercises, you don't make them because they've already been created, you're just completing those exercises. And then check the answers at the end. So most of the websites will include the answers, or they will check them automatically for you. So definitely do that. And that's what you would need to use, what you would need to do to solidify this in your head. But that's really it. Watch this video again if you need to. Write down those associations, make, create, produce, generate, and then words related to thought and speech. Do is for completing activity, and then for tasks, jobs, and general activities. So find some more practice exercises on the internet, check them, and then you'll never make a mistake with make or do again. I hope that helps.